Fulfill Radio, a voice you can trust. Broadcasting Live presents Two Guys and a Bible with Don Preston and William Bell. Join us each week at 7 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Central as we bring you exciting, sound, challenging, and comforting messages regarding the end times. Thank you for tuning in today. Don Preston is the founder of Preterists Research Institute, or PRI. Don is a prolific author, having written and published 19 books, a host of audio and DVD studies, and is a debater and defender of the full preterist view. His websites are BibleProphecy.com, eschatology.org, and DonKPreston.com. William Bell is the founder of AllThingsFulfilled.com Ministries and has a website bearing the same name, and has authored 3 books, audios, and DVDs. He has published hundreds of articles and recordings. And now, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Two Guys and a Bible broadcast with Don Preston and William Bell. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Two Guys and a Bible right here on Fulfill Radio, a voice you can trust. I'm William Bell, and I am currently, Don, is that you out here?
Yes, it is.
Okay, great. All right, for a moment, had a little problems getting audio sound from Don's microphone, but I think we got him here, so we're good to go. I am opening the chat room as I speak. I want to welcome everyone who has tuned in, and if you're just coming online, we've got a chat room that is opening for you, and I've also published the phone number so that if you wanted to call in and ask us a question that you want to get answered on the air, you can do that at 347-838-8252. Now, here's the protocol for the phone call. We're going to take your question, so make sure that you have it already thought out very carefully and that you have it very succinct. And we'll take that question because, see, my memory is short. I can't remember long questions. so give me a good, short, sweet question, and I will repeat that over the air, and then we will answer it, and we'll hang up at that point once we get the question on the air so that you can listen to it, and that'll be the way it goes. But, Don, how are you today?
Oh, just fantastic, William. I was just corresponding with some folks on Facebook a few moments ago, and they were talking about how cold it was where they are. I was speaking to David Curtis on the phone earlier today, and he said they woke up with 3 or 4 inches of snow on the ground in Virginia Beach. And I said, well, gee, I really hate to make you feel bad, but it was over 70 here in Ardmore today with sunshine, virtually no clouds, virtually no wind. It's like winter is over.
Yeah.
I didn't get a whole lot of appreciation from those folks. It was just like, well, whatever.
Memphis wasn't as good. We had a little overcast skies, but it was, partly cloudy, I guess you could say, and just a little drizzle of rain, just a mist for the most part in spots, not everywhere. But other than that, the weather was just absolutely gorgeous. I was driving around with both windows down, just keeping cool. so it was really nice here. And but we're delighted to be here tonight. We have another great show lined up for you. We're going to continue to talk about the question raised last week regarding our Preterists really futurists from Ken Gentry, who posted a blog to that effect and had a few comments that he made, and so we started to respond to that on last week, and we're going to continue that tonight. Other than that, Don, what else is going on in the Preterists Research Institute's world?
Well, it's just it's very, very exciting. I got some emails just today from individuals that had told me they had been raised in the dispensational paradigm, that they really had no reason to question it except for the simple fact that they had never studied it. They always just took the word of the so-called experts. And one particular individual informed me that he had accidentally discovered my YouTube videos and had begun watching them. And he said, I'm not going to tell you that I'm already convinced, but he said, you make such a sane, rational, calm, and logical argument when you present your case that it's just very, very difficult. And he said, to argue it, he said, when I pick up my Bible and I follow along, I find that's exactly what the Bible is saying. So he said, you've really thoroughly challenged me in my views. And he said, I've begun to be extremely excited about what I'm learning. And that's a couple of those. I've had a couple of those this early week, William. So that's always exciting to hear from people like that.
Yeah, that's good. It's very, very exciting to hear and see people, really transforming and changing their minds and their ideas. And it's based upon, solid reasoning and solid teaching. These people are not, off balanced or anything. They're very critical students of the Bible, and they recognize truth when they see it. And they don't have agendas to uphold for the most part. So they're just left to stand face to face with the scriptures and make a decision about that. And that's what's, so refreshing and rewarding about the privilege we have of teaching them. And of course, the work that you're doing is really spreading. I know you've been teaching, like posting videos to YouTube and Facebook every day now, almost for, I guess, forever. And those are having a tremendous effect on people, and so they're doing quite well. And we have videos on YouTube, and I go back. I'm much better now at going back and responding to comments on those videos when I go back across them, and because you get those updates, and so I try to respond to people, and you can just see the fact that they are learning, they're growing, they are excited about what they're receiving, and it's really good to know that. And of course, I got that email, I think, from you that had this list of preachers that had been that was quite exciting, and it goes right along with what Kenneth Gentry says, contrary to what some of our detractors have said, which is that preterism is not growing. The very fact that Gentry wrote his blog was that we're growing, and he felt like he had to break the silence and say something about it because it's becoming an issue, I should say an even greater issue because of that growth. So that's something to take note of.
Well, you mentioned that list that I sent to you. That list was obviously forwarded to me by someone else. And what's so fascinating about it, and I won't share all the details with it, but it is a list, folks, of 32 preachers from a major denomination. Their pictures and names are posted on what is called a wall of shame on the internet. And I suppose anybody can look that up. But be that as it may, the so-called leaders of that denomination have posted the pictures and the names of these men, all of whom are preachers within that denomination, who have themselves adopted the true preterist, view, covenant eschatology. And, of course, they're being labeled as outright false teachers, heretics, doomed to an eternal hell unless they repent and return to the fold. I found it absolutely fascinating that when that list was sent to me, I began to look at the names and the pictures and realized I've corresponded with a significant number of the men on that list. Several of the men on that list have purchased my books. So I would certainly like to think that we were able to help them in their studies a little bit. But the bottom line is, whether or not we had any influence on them or not, personally, the very fact that you have 32 ministers here from a major denomination that have espoused covenant eschatology is a rather significant thing. And it does indicate, as William just said, that in spite of the claims of men like Joel McDermott, Sam Frost, and others who ridicule the movement of covenant eschatology and say, oh, their number is just so insignificant, it doesn't mean anything. And yet the irony of that, of course, is Joel McDermott in his book on the use of biblical logic very quickly points out that the number of people who accept or deny a view does not determine its validity, and yet he turns around and ridicules covenant eschatology, the movement, because of the supposed small number of advocates and adherents to it. So it's just another example of Joel's complete logical inconsistency, which he's very, very guilty of on a common basis. So anyway, it was just great to see that so-called wall of shame of people, men, some of whom were very prominent in that denomination. And now they're suffering the ostracism for accepting the view of covenant eschatology. So, yeah, it's pretty cool. Lots of stuff going on, William.
Yeah, well, you mentioned, you were wondering about some of those men. I have talked to some on that list, and I know specifically that they have been influenced by our teachings, and so there's no doubt about it. I didn't know all of them, but I did know some of them, and I have talked, personally with a couple of them. So I know that has been the case, and it's not just here in the U.S. with these Pentecostal preachers that you refer to on that wall of shame, but there's a growing group of preachers in India and all around
Ethiopia.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we shouldn't fail to mention Mexico, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and other areas
Brazil.
as well. Brazil.
Yeah.
We hear from these places, folks, on a regular basis, and they tell us of what's happening in their communities and in their churches, and it's absolutely remarkable.
Yeah, we can't leave out the Philippines either.
Oh, absolutely. Don't intend to leave out anybody.
Yeah.
But the covenant eschatology is very clearly spreading. It's spreading not only in America, but as we've just suggested, it is spreading around the world. And people are so excited about it. And I can't fail to notice, William, I hear from people and they say, well, what about all these wackos on Facebook? Boy, there's some strange people on Facebook, and they claim to be preterists. And I very often tell people, you know what? You don't have to be on Facebook to be a preterist, believe it or not. There are a lot of us who were preterists before we ever even heard of Facebook or YouTube. And Facebook most assuredly does seem to attract how could I state this tactfully, William? Some weirdos.
That's about tactful as it can be.
That's about as tactful as I know how to be, because there are some people on there that have some of the strangest ideas, strangest concepts, and the sad reality of it is, the truly sad reality is, they no more know about what genuine exegesis is, what proper hermeneutic is. They do not even understand the basics of proper logic, and they read some text and they come up with some of these weird ideas, and they proclaim that they are now the authority. Nobody knows anything about the preterist view except them, and that all others who differ with them are absolute lunatics. They are the seed of the devil. They are the spawn of Satan, and on and on and on it goes. And those of us who have been around the block more than once or twice, we read some of that stuff, and we sit back and we just shake our head, and we literally hope that newcomers to the preterist movement do not find the comments by these people because they are, in some instances, they're nothing less than faith destroying. And in many instances, many instances, they are so agenda and personality driven that they have no basis whatsoever in biblical fact. It's all about the agenda, and it's all about their personality. They want to be the leader of their own little group or whatever. And it's truly sad. So I'm sort of kind of glad when I hear people say, should I even get on Facebook? And are there followers of the preterist movement on Facebook? And I'll be very candid with them. Yes, there's some wonderful, solid and sound preterists on Facebook. But you need to be very, very cautious, because there are also some very weird people. And I know that some people get horribly discouraged over what they see taking place on Facebook. I was in a conversation just last week with an individual talking about how sad the preterist landscape is on Facebook. And I said, well, yeah. And I said, here's what I perceive the problem to be, as I mentioned it to this individual. You have a whole lot more time than I do to be on all of these various and sundry preterist websites. And you read about all of these strange, weird, far-out views of these so-called preterists. And you kind of internalize that, and you get discouraged. I would, too, if I had the time to be on all of these different websites, to read all of these varied and sundry, strange, weird views. But maybe it's a blessing that I don't have time to be on all of those websites, Facebook pages. Maybe it's a blessing to me that I only have time to engage in email correspondence or YouTube correspondence with people who have serious questions about covenant eschatology. And so I don't have to hear about this, or I don't have to hear about that. I don't have to hear about this personality or that personality. But I also pointed out to this individual that as much as we do not like it, the bottom line is the Bible actually says, Paul said it in 1 Corinthians chapter 11, it is necessary that there are heresy of truth might be manifested. Now,
you're kind of going out, Don. Sounds like you might be dropping off into a barrel or something, so I take it that your audio might be kind of fading on us. And so far as I can hear, you haven't come back in. Well, actually, ladies and gentlemen, we've lost him temporarily, so he should be back. He probably has to dial in and re-establish his connection. And, you know, as he's talking about some of the comments and the people on Facebook and on various places, and you'll find them pretty much anywhere. You know, you'll find them on YouTube and other places with some rather outlandish and unsupported concepts of eschatology, and but that's no different from any other view that's out there. If you really got into it and really thought about it, it's just because preterism is, you know, gaining some attention and some momentum, and it's an opportunity for people to take advantage of others. I'm not sure what their motives are, but just from the standpoint of, you know, what they're saying, because, you know, people are interested, they're new, and they're trying to learn, and so when they come saying that they've got the latest and greatest, you know, in terms of their views, that's kind of what happens. So you just have to pay attention to whom you are listening, look for a pretty solid track record, and then you follow that one or two, or, you know, maybe it could be a half a dozen or more people, but just kind of watch what's going on and pay attention, and then you won't get caught up with a lot of, you know, the peripheral views that are out there floating around. because people are coming in and they are claiming to have all the truth on some of these issues. And one of the things that you might note as well is that even some of the people who are claiming to be preterists, we've seen in our experience, they have only embraced a part of it, so to speak. And what I mean by that is they have not yet fully understood even their own background, because they try to bring a lot of their background, their former, whether it's their previous denominational views, and of course all of us could be blind to that to some degree, but the purpose is that we're learning and bringing ourselves out of that. And I'm simply saying they think preterism is just an add-on to the Bible, and that's not the case. I mean, if you study eschatology, you're going to find that it's there from Genesis to Revelation. So it's going to cause you to change your views radically on pretty much everything you've been taught. And if you're not open to having that done, you might want to rethink your commitment to studying the preterist view to start with. Anyway,
Amen
Don,
to
you're
that.
back.
Yes, I am back. I did read one comment on Facebook today, and I'll leave it at this so that we can get back to an examination of Kenneth Gentry's article. But one preterist that I've corresponded with a good bit, I have a great deal of appreciation for him, but he made a comment, something to this effect. He said, folks, as preterists, we are not orthodox. It's time for everyone to realize we're not orthodox, so get over it. And you and I and others as well have had this conversation many, many, many times down through the years, and it gets to what you were just saying, William. Many people believe that covenant eschatology is sort of kind of an addendum that they can add, to the tradition that they were raised in. They think, oh, well, okay, no big deal. I'm a preterist now, but I'm also this because I've always been this. I was raised this way, but this is kind of good, so I'll become a preterist. No. As William was so well stating, covenant eschatology, when we properly understand it, is going to impact. It's going to have implications and ramifications for our entire traditional paradigms if we are willing to follow it. And some people are willing, some people are not. I cannot tell you the number of people that William and I have known through the years that got so excited about covenant eschatology they just could not hardly stand it. Well, then all of a sudden, when they, through their own study, began to see some of the implications for their traditional upbringing, I never forget. One person called me up from the Dallas-Fort Worth area, thrilled beyond words. This is going to change the world. Yes, it is. This is amazing. Yes, it is. And as he talked and talked and talked, I finally slowed him down. I said, well, you need to understand the church is very, very, very slow to change. And as you share this, people are going to get upset. Oh, why would anybody get upset with this? This is exciting. This is the truth. I said, yeah, but believe you me, they will get extremely upset, and they will label you as a troublemaker. They will label you as a heretic. They will label you as a church splitter. You cannot teach this. I just can't believe they'll do that. And he said, I just don't care. I'm going to share this. And I said, well, be cautious, be careful, be kind and loving. He called me back in about a month, and he said, well, I got to tell you right now, I'm through. I'm done. He said, everything you said is true. I've begun losing friends, and I've been called a church splitter. I've been called a troublemaker. And he said, I've been called other names that are far, far from Christian. And he said, I didn't sign on for this. And he said, I just want you to know, I don't want anything to do with this anymore. And I was like, well,
yeah.
Okay. All righty,
I'm
then.
laughing, but I know it's not funny.
Yeah.
We understand what it's like for people to go through that, and it hurts us to see some of the people coming on have to face it. But we faced it ourselves, and if you're not willing to do that, it's just not going to be for you. You got to really sit down and count the cost of what you're doing, and decide whether or not you're willing to pay that price.
Just exactly what Jesus said in Luke chapter 15. What man who sets out to go to war will not first sit down and count the cost to see if he, having 10,000, has enough to go out to battle a man with 20,000. And, what man sets out to build a house to make sure he doesn't count the cost first to see if he has enough to finish the job. Jesus was warning his first century disciples that trouble was coming. And they might be enamored with the idea, the thought, the excitement, enthusiasm that, hey, this is Jesus the Messiah. Wow, I'm going to follow him. And Jesus said, well, all right, but you better think about it. So that's what we have to do. Well, all of that said, William, back to the article by Kenneth Gentry. He posted the article on February the 8th of this year, and the title of the article is, Are Preterists Really Futurists? Now, we talked about it a good bit last week, but we didn't get down to the nitty-gritty of what Kenneth Gentry actually argued. Now, we did point out that Kenneth Gentry claims that preterists use the term futurist in a pejorative manner, which is absolutely not true. We do not do such a thing. We disagree, obviously, with the futurist paradigm, but we're not using that term in a pejorative way. Anything near like Kenneth Gentry uses the term hyper-preterist is most assuredly using that term in a pejorative manner. Now, he makes a comment. If it was legitimate to deride Orthodox preterists as futurists because they accept future elements in their eschatology, then it ought to be the case that dispensational futurists ought to be called preterists because they recognize certain prophecies were preteristically fulfilled in AD 70. For instance, they understand Luke 21, 20 through 24 prophetically pointed to AD 70. I got to tell you, William, I'm not sure what he's trying to prove there. Yes, some dispensationalists, most dispensationalists actually, do agree that Luke 21, 20 to 24 was fulfilled in AD 70. Does that make them partial preterists? Well, yes, you could make that argument because they believe that some prophecy, i.e. partial prophecy, stands fulfilled. But generally, we don't use the term partial preterist, although I have when referring to dispensationalists, but I'm not using it in a pejorative manner. I'm not trying to label them somehow disparagingly. I'm simply pointing out they are partial in their view of fulfillment. They believe that Christ came in fulfillment of Isaiah 7, and Isaiah in fulfillment at least partially of Isaiah chapter 9. So they're preterists in that regard. Thomas Ice is even on record as admitting that. So when Kenneth Gentry jumps up here and says, if it were legitimate to deride Orthodox preterists as futurists, because they accept future elements in their eschatology, then you ought to label dispensationalists as partial preterists. Okay, I do. So what's your point, Kenneth Gentry? I mean, that paragraph, when I read it, I was like, what is your point? Yes, amillennialists are partial preterist futurists. Postmillennialists are partial preterist futurists. Dispensationalists, although not to the same degree as amillennialists and postmillennialists, but dispensationalists are, in fact, guess what? Partial preterist futurists. But let me reemphasize, we're not using that in a pejorative, derisive manner. We're simply pointing out the facts. Kenneth Gentry understands that himself. He understands dispensationalists are partial preterists. Is he using that in a pejorative term? In a pejorative manner? In a derisive way? Well, doesn't seem to be. So that paragraph, along with several other paragraphs, as a matter of fact, are really quite confusing. The whole article really, and I'm going to say this as kindly as possible, this is not one of Kenneth Gentry's better written articles. William, on the second page of the article, he says, interestingly, one of the most important hyper-preterists was J. Stuart Russell, 1816 to 1895. His large and impressive work, The Parousia, 1887, was resurrected, ! In 1987 by Baker Bookhouse and has been a standard text of the hyper-preterist movement that developed after its publication. Well, I think it's really
republication.
Republication, correct, excuse me. Now, what I find so ironic, what I find disingenuous, what I find as flat out dishonest about Kenneth Gentry's article is that he is labeling J. Stuart Russell as a full, that is to say, a hyper-preterist. William, was J. Stuart Russell a true preterist?
I would say no, especially with the latter part of his book. He kind of hedged on a few things.
Absolutely. And by the way, Kenneth Gentry points that he quotes J. Stuart Russell's comments on Revelation 20:7 to 20, in which J. Stuart Russell posits the resurrection and the judgment at the end of the millennium in our future, thus meaning that J. Stuart Russell was not a, quote, hyper-preterist. That is to say, he was not a true preterist, which is to say, he was a partial preterist, just like Kenneth Gentry. Folks, do you catch the power of what Kenneth Gentry did here? Do you see how disingenuous and dishonest Kenneth Gentry has been in this article? He says, remember now, the title of the article, are preterists really futurist? And he talks about hyper-preterist, parentheses, or full preterism, or consistent preterism, or covenant eschatology as it is known by its adherents, end of parentheses. And he says it is an extension of preterism. Okay, so Kenneth Gentry understands that the full preterist view contains no element of futurist eschatology. He understands that his invented term, hyper-preterist, does not apply properly, accurately, honestly to partial preterist. But what does he do? He turns around and labels J. Stuart Russell as a hyper-preterist, but then turns around and quotes J. Stuart Russell, whose quote proves that J. Stuart Russell was not a, quote, hyper-preterist, unquote. It proves he was not a full preterist, unquote. It proves that he was, in fact, guess what? A partial preterist, just like Kenneth Gentry. And so Kenneth Gentry's closing comments, his closing question, should Russell then be written off as a futurist? Well, guess what, Kenneth Gentry? You just demonstrated that he was, in fact, a futurist. You just demonstrated that he doesn't belong in the camp of the true preterists, even though you label him inaccurately, inappropriately, and dishonestly as a hyper-preterist. Look, folks, if you got a copy of J. Stuart Russell's The Parousia, and just go online, Google it, you can find copies of that book. I recently was privileged and honored to be asked to write a foreword for another reprint of J. Stuart Russell's book. It was done in London or in England. It's now on the market. You can buy a copy of it, okay? So what you need to do, folks, is get a copy of J. Stuart Russell's The Parousia. Here's what you're going to find. This is incredible. You're going to find that J. Stuart Russell goes down systematically through the major eschatological texts of the New Testament, and he points out the time references there, the statements of imminence that are there, that demand a first century fulfillment, pardon me, of those prophecies. Now, catch this. In the vast majority, let me say that again, in the vast majority of the text that J. Stuart Russell comments on and points out the overwhelming sense of imminence in those texts, Kenneth Gentry agrees with J. Stuart Russell's first century application of those texts. Oh, whoa, hang on. As you go down through J. Stuart Russell, and you read about Matthew chapter 8, 11 and following, those from the east and the west they shall come from the east and west, and they shall sit down with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom, and the sons of the kingdom shall be cast out. J. Stuart Russell says, fulfilled in AD 70. Guess what? Kenneth Gentry agrees. Matthew 16, 27 and 28. The coming of the Son of Man in the glory of the Father before everyone standing there tasted death. J. Stuart Russell, AD 70. Kenneth Gentry agrees. Matthew 26:64, Jesus is on trial before Caiaphas and the Sanhedrin. And Jesus said, you, which is in the second person plural, not talking about Caiaphas individually, you will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven and power and great glory, which is a citation of Daniel chapter 7. J. Stuart Russell, fulfilled in AD 70. Kenneth Gentry, fulfilled in AD 70. Look, folks, I could go on and on and on. Hebrews 10:37, J. Stuart Russell, AD 70. Kenneth Gentry, AD 70. James 5:8 and 9. The coming of the Lord is drawn near. J. Stuart Russell, AD 70. Kenneth Gentry, AD 70. By the way, 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the coming parousia of our Lord Jesus Christ, and our gathering together to him, that you be not soon shaken in mind. Kenneth Gentry. J. Stuart Russell, AD 70. Kenneth Gentry, AD 70. Folks, you get the point? I mean, go ahead, William.
There's another subtle point that is deceptive in this comment that he made. I'm going to read it again just so I can point it out to the audience. So he says, second, interestingly, one of the most important hyper-preterists was J. Stuart Russell. His large and impressive work, The Parousia, 1887, was resurrected in 1987 by Baker Bookhouse and has been a standard text of the hyper-preterist movement that developed after its publication. Now, Don, I'm wondering where Kenneth Gentry is getting his information. I think, I remember now because I was still in high school when Max King debated Gus Nichols in that debate. And I know that Max had been studying covenant eschatology prior to that time. That was 1972 when I graduated high school. Don't nobody try to count up my age, okay? I started when I was a baby.
Yeah. Well, anyway.
And Don and I met through some writings that I had done because I embraced covenant eschatology in 1979. I had been a partial preterist for years prior to that and had embraced covenant eschatology because I started out basically 6 months after I was baptized studying the book of Revelation, having been written before 70 AD. So I was doing the work that Kenneth Gentry mastered when I was 6 months in the church. And that was in 1976, I think, somewhere around that time. And almost got kicked out of the church for studying Revelation, having been written before 70 AD. I mean, they were taking me over to the graduate school to talk with professors and everything because they thought I was way out of line and out of the norm. And so that was in 76. And in 79, I embraced full preterism at that time and went through almost got kicked out of seminary for that. So this has been going on for some time with me, and I didn't even know Max King at the time. As a matter of fact, I was in maybe my second year or late first year studying the book of Matthew. I remember, as a matter of fact, it was Gus Nichols' son-in-law who was teaching the class on Matthew, and he was teaching our class on Matthew. And when we got to passages like Matthew chapter 3 with John the Baptist talking about the root is laid to the axe is laid to the root of the trees, he said, well, brethren, Max King says this is 70 AD. Can you imagine? And we'd get to Matthew chapter 8. And he said, Max King says this is 70 AD. He's talking about Matthew 8, 11, and 12. Well, when he got to that verse, I had heard Max's name enough, and I'm saying, I'm sitting in classroom saying, I believe the same thing. And so at that point, I decided to go to Harding Graduate School and ask them, because I heard that he had published a book. And so I went to Harding and asked them if they had any books by Max King, and they had his what was the name of that book? What's the name of that?
Spirit of Prophecy.
The Spirit of Prophecy. That's correct. Thank you. The Spirit of Prophecy. They had two dusty covers that he reached way down under the bookshelf and got. Two dusty, and he had to dust them off when he gave them to me. And I told him, I said, I will take both copies. And I took both copies, and I think I gave one to another brother that I was studying with at the time who was, really open to what I was saying. But at any rate, that was in 1979, right at 1980. Now, Baker Bookhouse didn't publish or republish Russell's work until 1987. Well, Don, we were just about to do the seminars in Warren, Ohio around that time. I think it was 1989 when we did the first one, somewhere around that time. So, I mean, we had been going for quite some time. Of course, I had made communications with Max because I contacted him after I got his book. And ironically, I mean, this guy is a member of the Church of Christ just like I was, And I said, wow, this is interesting. So I called him up, and, we had a great conversation. He was shocked that I learned about it without any prior influence from anyone. And he thought that was just absolutely incredible, that I didn't have anybody to influence me to teach it. I mean, I just learned it reading the Bible, reading Luke chapter 21, a passage you've already referred to, Luke 21 through 24. So this statement here that he says the preterist movement developed after the publication of J. Stuart Russell's book is totally untrue. That is just absolutely a fabrication and deceptive, and wanting to give, and as you pointed out, he was not a full preterist because of the passages that you've alluded to, and but yet we were. And that was one of the disturbing things. As a matter of fact, that was one of the disturbing things about Fort Wallace's book on Revelation, that he took to be, he did a great job in establishing that it was written prior to 7 AD, just like Kenneth Gentry did. He didn't write as massive a work on the dating as Gentry did, but he had some very strong arguments on that book. And yet at the end of the book, he kind of did the same thing that J. Stuart Russell did. And that told you that he wasn't a full preterist; he was a partial preterist too. But yet, they hated his book. So it's just rather interesting that he would make that comment. But that just jumped off the page at me when he said 1987. And I've lived enough of this history to know that it is not right.
Well, you're absolutely right, and that goes back to the fact that the opponents of covenant eschatology like very often to skewer the facts and to skewer the history. William, I have in my library several books, and going back to the 19th century, going into the 1950s in America, and I have one book that was written by a minister by the name of Jeffries.
Yes, Cyrus
and
Jeffries.
Cyrus Jeffries. The name of the title of the book is longer than your name, my name, and 14 other names put together. I mean, it is the title of the book is literally an entire sentence, but but it was a full preterist book written in the 19th century. So. And by the way, it was written before J. Stuart Russell.
Yes, it was. I think by about 10 years or so.
Yeah, by about 10 years. And, when people start saying, well, preterism had never even been heard of until Max King, or had never been heard of until J. Stuart Russell, I just say, folks, you really, honestly need to do some study. And I don't know if you're familiar with the name of Hugo Grotius or not, but Hugo Grotius is one of the most fascinating figures, in my estimation, that ever lived. He was truly a child prodigy. He was, get this, folks, a college professor at the age of 14 years old.
Wow.
Can you imagine that? Hugo Grotius wrote maritime laws all the way back there in the 15th century, and the maritime laws that he wrote are still used in the world today. Hugo Grotius was a monumental man. And I started running on to references to Grotius, and I believe he was 15th century, perhaps he's 16th. I'd have to go back, refresh my memory. But Hugo Grotius, I kept reading him being quoted, and you would read such things as the illustrious Grotius said, blah, 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 and you're going, whoa, that's powerful. And there's no question whatsoever that Grotius was extremely highly respected by scholars from the 18th and the 19th centuries, and quoted by them as an eminent Bible scholar. And I have to tell you, William, I have never found a biblical text that Hugo Grotius did not apply to AD 70. I in the reading that I did, and I bought up manuscript after manuscript. I would get online. I would go to interlibrary loan, and I would get books through that. I never read a single comment by him on a single passage of Scripture in which he took a futurist view. Now, we don't ever hear about Grotius today, but Hugo Grotius was an outstanding Bible scholar. And he was, to the very best of my knowledge, he was a full preterist all the way back in either the 15th or the 16th century. And again, I have to refresh my memory on which one it was. But that's a long time before 1987. You would think that Kenneth Gentry would do a little bit of homework before making such ungrounded, unfounded, unhistorical comments. I mean, after all, he is a well-learned man. He is a true scholar in many, many ways. And yet he says the preterist movement sprang out of J. Stuart Russell, when historically, that's just absolutely historically false. There's no merit to it whatsoever.
You know, I would also say
go ahead.
that you could probably put 10 preterists in the room, and I'd imagine half of them may not even know J. Stuart Russell.
Well, that's absolutely true. I hear from people a lot. And if I ever mention, pardon me, J. Stuart Russell, well, who's that? When did he write? Oh, wow, that was a long time ago. And they most assuredly never heard of Grotius, by the way.
Or Cyrus Jeffries.
Or Cyrus Jeffries. Or Hammond. What was his name? Oh, my goodness gracious. I just lost Henry Hammond. Henry Hammond wrote in the 16th century. He wrote a commentary, annotations on the New Testament, and there's a whole lot of title after that as well. And I got that on microfiche years and years ago, and I kept reading text after text after text in which he just explicitly posited fulfillment in AD 70. And I kept thinking to myself, wow, this guy seems to be a full preterist. So I thought, well, all I got to do is go to 1 Corinthians 15, and that will reveal whether or not he was genuinely a true preterist or whether he was, a futurist. Amazingly, what Henry Hammond did repeatedly throughout his commentary on 1 Corinthians 15 is to say things something like this: there is no doubt whatsoever that the primary application of this was to the end of the Old Covenant age in AD 70 at the second coming of Christ. Now you got to keep in mind, folks, that when Henry Hammond wrote, if you were considered a false teacher, they didn't just fire you, they took you out and killed you. So Henry Hammond would make statements like that. There's no question that that the initial fulfillment of this, the proper fulfillment of this, was in AD 7 at the end of the Old Covenant age and the second coming of Christ. We do not doubt that there is a yet future coming of the Lord, but we will not discuss it in this place. And he never got around to discussing it in any text that I read. I figured he was just covering himself, making sure he didn't get killed. Who knows? But there you have a 16th century scholar who, if you accept his comments, you would conclude that he was a full preterist. Now, William, we've only got a few moments left here. I've had several people contact me and say, well, you said that you had sent Kenneth Gentry a challenge to meet you in formal debate. What has come of it? Well, a couple of days after sending the challenge, I got a response back, as you well know, because I forwarded it to you, William.
Yes.
And Kenneth Gentry said, Don, I appreciate your persistence. However, and you can only imagine what the however led to. He said, my schedule simply will not allow, I'm paraphrasing here, folks. He said, I've just signed a contract that will keep me tied up for the next 3 years. And on and on. Basically, it was, Don, I don't have time to debate you. He said, I no longer debate because of the time demands necessary for debate. I cannot say that I am in any way whatsoever surprised. Disappointed? Absolutely. I would love nothing better than to meet Kenneth Gentry in a formal debate. But Kenneth Gentry knows full well that if he gets on a debate platform with me, he's not going to be debating Don Preston. He's going to be debating Kenneth Gentry and the Bible. Because Kenneth Gentry is well aware of the fact, by the way, he has several of my books. Kenneth Gentry knows that I am fully conversant with his books, with his writings. I am fully aware of the positions, of the arguments that Kenneth Gentry makes, has made. I am fully aware of the inconsistencies in his argumentation. I am fully aware of the dramatic, the radical changes that Kenneth Gentry has made on major eschatological passages down through the years, all without telling anybody that he did change, by the way. So I know Kenneth Gentry's writings extremely well. So let me say again, Kenneth Gentry knows full well. And by the way, several of the other dominionist, partial preterist, postmillennialists are the same way. You got to give Joel McDermott credit for actually debating me. I'm real sure he'll never do that again. But at least he met me one time. Now, he later said he only did it for the money. So that there is that, which is really a sad testimony, you know, to just openly state that he debated me, not for truth, not to expose coveted eschatology. He did it for the money. Kind of a sad situation. But that's where it stands, folks, in my challenge to Kenneth Gentry and a debate. He is not going to debate me because he's too busy. That's his story, and he's sticking to it. Well, you know, folks, we've demonstrated to you how Kenneth Gentry in the article completely misrepresents the facts. He accused J. Stuart Russell of being a true preterist when he wasn't. He labeled him a hyper-preterist when he was not a full, true preterist. He misrepresented the facts of where the full preterist movement sprang from, i.e., from J. Stuart Russell's the reprint of it in 1987. Everywhere you turn in Kenneth Gentry's article, he misrepresents the facts. He twists the facts. He is guilty of misdirection and misrepresentation. You would hope that one of these days that people can stop this foolishness and actually discuss the issues, to come to the table, lower the heat, and discuss the merits of covenant eschatology based on the biblical fact. Not based on the creeds, not based on church history, not based on false representations of early writers, but what says the Scripture. And with that, folks, we are out of time. Thank you so very, very much for joining us tonight on Two Guys in a Bible, a voice you can trust. And with that, we will say good night. God bless.
Thank you for joining the Two Guys in a Bible radio broadcast. On behalf of Dunn Preston and myself, we'd like to say have a very pleasant day, and may God bless. Until next time, we'll see you on Fulfill Radio, a voice you can trust.